So some time ago, I stumbled upon a website for a nonprofit called Plus Acumen, and they're a nonprofit that offers low to no cost courses to people who are interested in social change, which is a great idea, I think. So while looking through what they have available, I found a course that really caught my eye, and it was called Radical Candor. And I mean, I'm always interested in ways to be more honest with myself and others. So I started to look at what the course was about, and I wound up reading this book called Radical Candor by a woman named Kim Scott. So she is a CEO coach in Silicon Valley who worked in many different settings, including medical care and so forth, and wound up trying to do her own startups. The startup failed, and she wound up working in Google and Apple before starting her own company. And what she learned from working at all these different places was how to build great teams. That's what her book is concerned with, and how a leader can help to create a culture of good communication, guidance, and care, and so that the team can work together to achieve common goals. So I think all of us work in teams and communities. So I wanted to share some of the thoughts from her book that I found really quite interesting, and maybe try and Buddhistify them and see how they might make sense for in the Buddhist context. So the core idea of her book, right, is a radical candor. Oh dear, it got a little scratch and I don't have a marker here. I have never been to business school. I understand what you learn is to make a 2x2 framework if you go to these places. But anyhow, the main idea she had here was she made it two axes for how we communicate with people, especially when we're trying to give guidance, positive and more difficult to hear, shall we put it that way. And the first axis she drew was called care personally. And then the next one was called the challenge directly axis. And in one of the talks she gave, she put love at the very top. So if I were to Buddhistify it, I would say love and compassion might be at the very top when we care personally for someone, right? And then at the opposite end, we have hatred and apathy, right? And then on the challenge directly axis, I would read maybe wisdom on one end, when our mind is clear, we know exactly what we need to say. And on the other end is self-centered thought. So maybe I'll just give some examples that I think fit what this framework is about. At least it's what I understand of it. So in the case of radical candor, we're in a space where we have love and compassion for the person involved, and we are quite clear what we need to say to them to help them to grow. We're willing to challenge them directly because we care. Yeah, she even goes so far as to say it is our moral obligation to be radically candid. That sounds a bit heavy, yeah? But as in, it's like, if you see something's wrong and it's harming the person and others, then we got to find a way to build a relationship such that we can tell them. So I thought that was an interesting idea. So a very simple example of how I experienced radical candor myself was one of the first times I received feedback from vulnerable children. I was still a layperson. I was serving her on a trip in India. And then, I was just following her and doing a lot of the things to support the trip. And then one day she suddenly decided to tell me, and this was quite near the end of the trip, she said, well, if you're planning to come train at the Abbey, you might consider not wearing such form-fitting clothing and consider not standing in ways that show off your figure. So I was like, oh, okay. But it's just very clear, and there were clear suggestions, right, like what to do. There was no personal attack. I heard it as guidance, so I said, okay. I went and bought some big t-shirts. It was very simple. Then I came back to her and I said, do you have more feedback for me? And she said, get some deodorant. And for a while I was like, whoa, feel like shocked. But again, it was clear, right? It wasn't like you stink or, oh God, I've sat with you in cars for 3 months and I want to die. So it was clear I could act on it. And I did. I bought some deodorant. Simple. So that was my idea. Radical candor doesn't have to be very hard. And it does come with a lot of care. Yeah? It wasn't something she told me 2 weeks into meeting her. We had built a relationship of trust. And she knew, simple, straightforward, direct. So the other example I gave was when we fall into obnoxious aggression, is what she calls it. Kind of heavy. But I think it's when we don't really care personally about the person in that situation, probably overcome by anger, but we want to challenge them directly. So that's, for example, saying, wow, you really smell bad to someone in front of a whole group, right? So that's lacking on the care or love and compassion part. But Kim Scott was saying, this is actually not so bad because the person still knows they have a problem. At least you were honest. So it may not have sounded good, but they can at least act on getting the deodorant. Yeah. She said one thing that we fall into, though, is sometimes when we challenge someone directly and they become with some anger, then we get reactivity in return, right? The person's like, how dare you say that about me? And she said, then the tricky part is we often backpedal and get into here what she calls manipulative insincerity, where we're both fearful for our own feelings and we don't necessarily care for the person directly or personally either. So here the example she gave was, for example, let's say I told someone, wow, you smell really bad. And then they're like, what? How could you say that? Then I backpedal and say, oh, I didn't really mean it. It's okay. You smell fine. Not, right? So, in extreme situations, I think we've all done that, right? Where we, in the worst case scenarios, she was pointing out at work situations where someone's really not doing well at work, but nobody tells them, and there are all these plans being made to fire them, So that's really difficult and painful for both the party involved, the boss, and the whole team, right? Because there's no honesty to help the person grow. But she did say, by far most often we fall into this category called ruinous empathy, where we really care very deeply about the person, but I would say because of our self-centered thought, we're just afraid of hurting their feelings. We imagine we're responsible for their feelings, so they may smell bad and we just don't say anything because we're afraid of embarrassing them. So, it just goes on for a long time. The one example she gave was, someone comes out of the bathroom with their zipper undone and nobody tells them. And then maybe end of the day, they realize that was the case and they wonder, why didn't anyone tell me? So that's when I think if we care a lot personally, but we don't have the wisdom perhaps to challenge directly, that can happen. So I like that she said too that this is not a framework by which we judge ourselves and others. She was saying all of us fall in these quadrants at any given time, given our state of mind and the relationship with others. It's just a framework that helps us to see how we might shift towards conversations that are more in this direction. And what I found really interesting was, okay, so of course this book now has to tell you how do you develop something like this, right? And the first thing that she said to develop radical candor was to invite feedback for yourself. Invite people to criticize you instead of giving criticism. Especially she was directing this to bosses, to go and talk to your teams and say, what am I doing that is helpful or not helpful to working with each other? Or whatever version of that, like to be very direct. And she even told all these bosses, like your reportees are not going to want to tell you the truth, but persevere, break through the discomfort. She even says count to 6, and just push forward to encourage people to tell you the truth about what it's like to work with you. And she said that is a way of practicing humility, right? It shows that you want to learn what works, what doesn't. And also, it helps you to hear how feedback lands for people. Right? When you hear them give you criticism, you can see for yourself what works, what doesn't, when you get reactive yourself. So I thought that was a really smart technique. But it also made me think, wow, I think the Buddha is a genius because he's instituted that for monastics. All of us do an invitation for feedback at least once a year, if not more. That's what our pravarana is about at the end of the monastic retreat, where we, for 3 months, practice together in one place. And the retreat's supposed to end with monastics who wish to grow, who want to learn, inviting each other to point out our faults. So I thought, okay, that piece for me really fit with my practice, I guess. That there's no other way to grow except to invite people to point out your blind spots, even if it can be very painful. And figuring out how to build the courage to hear that. Seeing this format of speaking, what wisdom and compassion in communication might look like, helped me to make more sense of the Theravada Vinaya, is that what we call it? The Pali tradition, the Pali Canon. Yeah. So I haven't actually received teachings on them. I enjoy reading the suttas sometimes. And for a while, I used to be quite disturbed, like, wow, the Buddha sounds really fierce in some of these suttas. He's like just giving it to his disciples, But now in this context, I see that he's often doing it out of great care. He knows the situation of this disciple, what they can hear, what they can't. Of course, it helps to be omniscient. And he's very, very direct about what is helpful on the path and what is not. Yeah. And I really appreciate that at the start of the Vinaya Sutta, the Buddha actually engages in this back and forth with a Brahmin who comes to the Buddha and basically gives him negative feedback for about 2 pages in the text, which is, the Brahmin comes and says things like, the Reverend Gautama has no taste. And the Buddha doesn't freak out or scream at the guy, of course not. He just says, that's true. The Buddha has no taste, because I have no taste for forms, feelings, discrimination, sounds, smells, and so forth. So, again and again, this Brahmin gives him feedback like that. Like, the Reverend Gautama has no has no lust, or I forget what it is, but he's just insulting him, it sounds like, again and again. And the Buddha just keeps agreeing with him and turning it around and saying, yes, that's true, in this way. So until, of course, the very end of it, the Brahmin decides to take refuge in the Buddha because he's so impressed by this person who is, totally willing to engage with him and honest as well. So another step that she points out, that aside from asking for criticism ourselves, is to put more effort into giving praise than criticism. So maybe praise and criticism are words that we find difficult, maybe as Buddhist practitioners, right? We're not supposed to be attached to praise or averse to criticism. So maybe one other way of thinking about it could be, positive feedback or negative feedback. In any case, she was saying you have to put a lot more effort into pointing out what works, because that's what is going to encourage people and guide people. So she said, think about how much time you actually put into giving praise, versus giving negative feedback. And she was saying how you have to really put a lot of thought into praise that works well. So, it's one thing for me to say, hey, great job, Venerable Losang, awesome, right? Versus I want to say, one thing I want to point out that really worked for me was yesterday Venerable Losang was very kind and he taught me how to use a screw gun, the highlight of my day yesterday, because I asked him, please teach me to use a screw gun. And what I really appreciated was that you took the time to set up the project, you had all the materials ready, and you were guiding me step by step through what to do. We had practice drills with the screw gun, putting the screws in, taking them out, before we started working on the garden beds. So that really met my need for collaboration and guidance. Yeah. So, when we give positive feedback like that, I think people know very clearly what was helpful and they're able to act on it, right? Versus, great job, well done. So, but it takes more effort on our part. She also said how difficult it is, though, for everybody to give criticism without discouragement. So that's something that all of us have to put into practice, too. And I like that she said this is something we practice again and again, kind of like brushing your teeth or flossing. She said it doesn't have to be some painful, difficult, hard thing where you save up all your honest feedback for 1 hour at the end of the week or whatever. But she was saying, if it becomes part of your life, just to point out what's working with people, or to, when something's difficult, to see if you can get into a place of honesty and connect with them about it, then it becomes kind of natural. It's part of your life and how you communicate. So the other piece that this book I thought was helpful in, so aside from this radical candor framework, the other piece it looks at is how to motivate people and teams. So again, I thought about how the Buddha was very skillful. Right, he, aside from the times where he's had to challenge his disciples directly, right, clearly they're doing something that's harmful or it's not gonna, like they're at the edge of the cliff and he has to be like, stop. He also was very kind towards disciples' different dispositions. What came to my mind was how he worked with his own half-brother Nanda. You remember the famous story of Nanda ordained and he was very, very attached to his wife and he kept pining for his wife and the monastics were like, come on, but the Buddha was not critical of him. He took him to the heavenly realms and said, hey, if you focus on your meditation and work really hard, these are the beautiful women you will encounter in the heavenly realms. And Nanda at that time was like, oh, wow, they look a lot better than my wife. Let's go for it. So he starts to meditate really hard. And of course, as he attains higher states of realization, he's like, that was not a fruitful goal. And he tells the Buddha, I'm sorry I even thought about that. But I thought that was a great, skillful means, right? He wasn't like, your attachment's really bad, you must never speak to your wife again, go kneel somewhere. But, he worked with the person's dispositions. So toward the end of the book, she gives an example of how Google worked with their teams, because there's so much war for talent in Silicon Valley and people don't necessarily want to work for that team forever, right? So it was interesting. She said they came up with a series of 3 career conversations to have with people. So the first one they would have with a new staff would be about their life story. just sitting down and hearing the person's life. And they're trying to identify what motivates the person. And they would collaboratively write down, like, oh, what motivates you? Teamwork. You know, yeah, having a sense of personal fulfillment in what you do. Yeah. But all that would come out from telling the person's life story. And they would ask specifically, like, tell me turning points in your life and why you made those decisions. So that would be one conversation. Then about a week later, the team lead would sit down with the employee and say, tell me 5 dreams you have. And they ask for 5 because they say often people will tell the boss what they think they want to hear for the first few dreams. But they're like, no, really tell me your dreams. And then they would draw a chart with the 5 dreams and the skills you need to achieve those dreams. So the example they gave was someone's dream was to start a spirulina ranch. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing the word correctly. And they were like, oh, great. So they saw that this person needed management skills to start a spirulina ranch. And so that's how they assigned that person to their work. They said, well, at first they thought she should do more presentations, but they decided because she wanted to start a spirulina ranch, they were going to assign her to mentors who could help her with management and train her to lead teams. And so as a result, this person actually stayed on the company for a few more years than she had intended to, because she was learning and moving towards her dreams. Yeah. And so the third conversation after they've worked out these dreams and skills is to actually do a plan about what this person's going to do to develop them. And it was quite touching. They said, the boss was talking to one of the reportees and said, it sounds like you have a value for hard work. Why is one of your dreams to retire early? And then the person said, oh, because I have an autistic son. So I want to retire early so I can spend time with him. So, learning that was very important for the leader to really help the team to grow together. So after that, it says these team leaders actually draw up growth plans for the team members and try and figure out how to, create an environment where the team can grow together and still achieve what the team's supposed to do. So I think I like that idea. Maybe it's something I'll try out in my free time. Because I think as monastics, it is our personal responsibility very much to think about how we want to grow. And not just to wait for someone to, sit down with us and have those conversations. Maybe as spiritual practitioners, that is our responsibility, right? To think about what qualities we want to develop, how we're going to work on different afflictions, and how we want to progress towards our goal of Buddhahood. And I'll finish off with a quote in the book that came from Thoreau in Walden. I have not read this book, but I just quite like this quote about how what is possible for us when we've done this inner work, I guess, to learn to connect with each other in an honest and wise and compassionate way. So this is from Thoreau. He says, if one advances confidently in the direction of their dreams and endeavors to live the life which they have imagined, they will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. They will put some things behind and will pass an invisible boundary. And even if you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. So just the idea that if we connect with our deepest aspirations, we will be able to achieve more than we ever imagined. And if we do that as a team, I think the results will be, we see them here. Yeah, quite palpable and have a long-lasting impact on the world and beyond. Yes, Christina has a question. I'm sorry, this is a long talk. It's way beyond lunch.
It's how to deliver radical candor. I thought it was interesting in your interactions with Venerable Children. You had asked her on both occasions. She didn't just come out and blurt it. So did this author say anything about how to deliver it gently, like words to precede it?
No, the first time she told me directly. I didn't ask for feedback. But anyhow, so she was saying that actually start by asking for feedback for yourself. She was telling all these team leads, it seems like you have to build up a solid relationship before you can start delivering what sounds like criticism. Yeah. So she said focus a lot more on giving encouragement and specific guidance. Yeah. I think the guidance piece is what helps. All the examples she gave were it wasn't like a personal attack, or it never left the person wondering what am I going to do next? Yeah, so the example she gave for herself was her boss was Sheryl Sandberg. After an amazing presentation she gave, brought her into her office and said all the good things that had gone well, and then told her, by the way, you say a lot. Like, what's going on there? You say every 3 words. Would you like to hire a speech coach? Google can pay for it. And she kept brushing off the feedback, like, oh, it's a small thing. I've given a lot of great presentations. And then Sheryl Sandberg actually went back and said, sounds like you're not getting what I'm saying. You sound really stupid when you say a lot. And she was like, whew. But I know a speech coach and we can help you. Yeah, so from there on, she realized her boss really cared, right, and was trying to help her. First she couldn't hear she was brushing her off, and then finally she had to come back in a very direct way. And she said for herself, she tried the speech coach and found it was true. She was saying every 3 words, and that it was a huge help for her afterwards in terms of confidence in speaking. So I guess like that maybe, that it's coming across as guidance, and already there's the relationship of trust with the person.